I found out my husband was cheating because of a playlist he made for someone else. I never thought I'd be the kind of person writing this. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person staring at a screen, typing my life's collapse, hoping someone, anyone, would understand. But here I am, hands shaking, heart pounding, trying to make sense of a world that no longer makes sense. I, 33 female, have been with my husband, 35 male, for almost 10 years, married for 7. People always described us as boring but perfect for each other. I never questioned it. Sunday morning coffee at the little cafe down the street, late night walks with Penny, our golden retriever, inside jokes no one else got, the way he'd hold my hand during thunderstorms even if I tried to act brave. Our love felt steady, reliable, and safe. Maybe too safe. Maybe too comfortable. I noticed the first lil cracks months ago, small things that I brushed off because, really, who wants to admit their life is shifting under them? He started coming home later, working overtime, more than usual. His phone was always out of reach, always on silent. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe everyone has phases, that maybe he just needed space. But a part of me, a small, quiet, insistent part, started to suspect something. It hit me one night while we were cooking dinner together. I asked Alexa to play our playlist, the one we made years ago, with our favorite songs, memories stitched into the tracks. He pressed a button, and something else played. Not ours. A playlist titled, Pharrell. I froze. My knife hovered over the chopping board. Pharrell? I repeated, voice trembling, because that wasn't me. My name doesn't start with L. He stammered, fumbled, and muttered, oh, wrong one. But his eyes betrayed him, that deer in headlights panic. I didn't eat dinner that night. I barely slept. I didn't even know what to feel. Curiosity, denial, and instinct pushed me to do the thing I swore I would never do. I opened his laptop while he was in the shower. I hate myself for it, but I had to know. There it was, Pharrell. Indie songs, soft romantic tracks, lyrics about longing, about love, about missing someone. And the description? For when you think about her smile. I froze. My breathing stopped. My chest hurt in a way that felt like it would never end. The next day, I asked him casually, trying to sound calm. Who's L? He froze. Swallowed. Just a friend from work, he said, too fast, too careful. And the playlist? I pressed. She was having a bad week. It's just music. Just music. Just music. But I couldn't get past the feeling in my stomach, the sinking, twisting knot. I started noticing things I had ignored before, perfume, small lies about weekends, the way he laughed at messages on his phone and immediately hid it when I came into the room. My mind began connecting dots, forming a terrifying picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. A week later, I asked again, directly, and he froze. Then he muttered, it's nothing. I promise. It was a lie. I opened his messages while he was in the shower. iMessage synced to the laptop. Lena. Her name stared back at me. The thread went back months, full of, good mornings, miss you, can't wait to see you, inside jokes, stolen moments. There were photos, casual, intimate, nothing explicit, but the kind that made my stomach churn and my heart shatter. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember moving. I just sat there, staring. When he emerged from the shower, I was on the couch, laptop open. He froze. I'm sorry, he whispered. Those words tore me apart. I asked him how long. 6 months. I asked if he loved her. He didn't answer. Silence filled the room. That silence was my answer. The next few days were a nightmare. He slept on the couch. I cried until my throat was raw. I went to work, but I couldn't focus. I called my sister and lied, saying I was under the weather. Nobody knew. I couldn't tell anyone. The betrayal was mine to live through. He tried to apologize, to explain, to justify, but nothing he said could erase what I had seen. And then there was that playlist, a haunting echo of months I would never get back. Every song I heard afterward was a reminder that love can betray you without warning. I couldn't sleep that night. Not really. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, listening to Penny's soft breathing from her bed in the corner. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his phone. I saw the playlist. I saw Lena's name blinking on the screen, like a neon sign pointing to everything I had missed, everything I had ignored, everything I hadn't wanted to see. I got up around 3 a.m., pacing the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in my hands. My hands were shaking, my chest felt like it had been hollowed out. I kept muttering to myself, questions that had no answers. How long? Why? How could you do this? By the time the sun started to creep through the curtains, I had made a decision. I needed to confront him. I couldn't let this fester in silence. And yet, even as I steeled myself, I felt sick. afraid, angry, and, in some twisted part of me, still yearning for him to be the man I thought I knew. He was in the living room when I returned from my walk with Penny, sipping his coffee, scrolling through his phone. That casual domesticity made my stomach twist. I hated him, but I hated how normal he looked too. How could someone who had dismantled my world appear so calm? "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted. He looked up. The expression on his face, that deer in headlights, caught in the act expression, made me feel like I was both predator and prey. "I know," he said softly. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the mug across the room. Instead, I gestured toward the couch. "Sit. Now." He obeyed, eyes downcast. I perched on the edge of the armrest, legs crossed, trying to steady my breathing. I felt the weight of everything, betrayal, grief, anger, confusion, pressing on me from every side. "How long?" I asked. 6 months, he admitted again, barely above a whisper. Hearing it out loud was worse than reading it on the screen. 6 months. Half a year of stolen time, stolen laughter, stolen intimacy. I remembered all the overtime nights, all the sudden weekends with friends, all the times he smiled at his phone and I thought nothing of it. I had been living in a half-truth, pretending everything was fine while the foundation of our life rotted beneath me. "And you ended it?" I asked, my voice brittle. He nodded, looking at me like he might collapse under the weight of my gaze. "Yes," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "I ended it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted desperately to. But the playlist, the messages, the laughter he had shared with her, they didn't disappear with the word ended. They lingered, like smoke in the air, impossible to ignore. "Do you even feel guilty?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Every day," he said. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I wanted a confession. I wanted him to crumble. I wanted an explanation that made sense. I wanted him to be ashamed in a way that mirrored the chaos inside me. But there was only the acknowledgement of guilt, and it felt like a small, fragile bandage on a wound too deep to heal quickly. The conversation spiraled. I asked questions I didn't even know the answers to, demanded details I wasn't sure I wanted. He answered honestly, painfully, each word a dagger and a bomb at the same time. "Was it emotional? Physical?" I asked. He swallowed. "Both," he admitted. I flinched, feeling like my chest had been ripped open. I had expected lies, excuses, denials, not honesty. Honesty cut deeper than any deception. We didn't resolve anything that day. We didn't fix the marriage, didn't rebuild trust, didn't reclaim what we lost. We simply existed in the same room, both aware that the life we shared was fractured, maybe beyond repair. The following week was a haze. I slept in the guest room. He stayed on the couch. Penny, our golden retriever, was the only constant. She didn't judge. She didn't care. She just sat with me while I cried, resting her head on my lap as if trying to absorb my pain. I found myself obsessing over the details. How she texted him late at night. The way he responded. The weekends he supposedly worked. I read the messages again and again, memorizing the exact words, the emojis, the small flourishes of affection that made my heart ache. I hated myself for knowing them, for letting them consume me, but I couldn't stop. Every sound in the house reminded me of them. The creak of the floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, the way he laughed softly to himself when he thought I wasn't watching. I began to distrust everything, including my own memory, my own judgment. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind for so long? I tried talking to friends, but their advice felt hollow. Leave him. Forgive him. It happens. None of it matched the chaos inside me. Nobody could understand the mix of love, anger, grief, and longing that twisted in my chest. I reached out to a therapist. The first session was excruciating. I cried for nearly an hour, telling her everything, from the playlist to the messages to the moments of happiness that now felt poisoned. She didn't judge. She didn't offer platitudes. She just listened, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of clarity. "You can't control him," she said gently. "You can only control your healing." Simple. Harsh. True. I began journaling. Every night, I poured the chaos onto the page. Anger, sorrow, fear, nostalgia. Some nights I wrote until my hands ached, until tears blurred the ink. Other nights, I just stared at the blank page, letting silence fill the void. Slowly, the process became a lifeline. We attempted tentative conversations. I would ask questions. He would answer. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes we just sat, each aware of the invisible chasm between us. Trust doesn't return overnight. Trust, if it ever comes back, comes in pieces, fragile and easily broken. I started taking walks alone. I rediscovered little joys. The smell of rain, the warmth of the sun on my face, Penny's playful antics. I began to rebuild myself in small ways, clinging to routines, creating boundaries, learning that survival didn't require reconciliation, didn't require forgiveness, didn't require understanding. It only required breathing, existing, and protecting myself. And through it all, I kept thinking about the playlist. I listened to it once, just to understand, just to feel the pain fully. Each song was a reminder, each lyric a knife twisting in my chest. And yet, I survived the listening. I survived the memories. I survived him. I don't know if I'll forgive him. I don't know if our marriage will survive. I don't even know if I want it to. But I do know that I'm here. Still standing. Still breathing. Still trying to reclaim a life that doesn't revolve around betrayal. Sometimes I imagine leaving. Sometimes I imagine staying. Sometimes I imagine a life that never included Lena. But mostly, I imagine me, existing, surviving, growing. And that's enough, for now. Weeks turned into months. Time moved both slowly and impossibly fast. Each day a new test, each hour a reminder of what had been stolen. I found myself waking up with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake, no matter how many walks I took or journal pages I filled. It was there when I made coffee, when I brushed my teeth, when I let Penny chase a stick in the yard. Even when I tried to talk to friends, their words of encouragement felt like static. Nobody could truly know what it was like to feel betrayal pulse through your veins like a second heartbeat. He stayed in the house, still sleeping in the guest room, still giving me the space I demanded, but I noticed the way he avoided me. Not intentionally, I think. Fear and shame are heavier than any wall. He'd hover around the kitchen while I did chores, hoping for conversation, or perhaps waiting for me to break. But I didn't. Not yet. Not then. The playlist was still there, tucked in his Spotify library like a scar that refused to heal. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but sometimes it called to me. Sometimes I would catch myself hovering over it, a compulsion I hated but couldn't resist. I wanted to understand him. I wanted to understand her. I wanted to understand why someone I loved could simultaneously hold my hand and shatter my heart. Therapy became my anchor. I found a counselor who didn't flinch when I recounted every message, every song, every stolen weekend. She didn't tell me to forgive him. She didn't tell me to leave. She just listened and asked questions that forced me to confront the depth of my own emotions. "Why do you feel responsible?" she asked one afternoon. Because I hesitated. Because I loved him, I trusted him, I believed in us. And somehow, if I'd been better, if I'd been more, maybe this wouldn't have happened. She shook her head gently. "You didn't cause his choices. His actions are his own. Your love, your trust, your commitment, none of it invited betrayal." Simple words, but they were revolutionary to me. I began to repeat them daily, like a mantra, like a lifeline. I didn't cause this. His choices are his own. Slowly, I let the words sink in, sink deep into the parts of me that blamed, the parts of me that spiraled. I started journaling again, but with more intention. I didn't just recount the betrayal. I explored my emotions, my triggers, the way certain songs or smells could send me tumbling into grief. I recorded small victories. Walking alone without panic, cooking a meal without shaking, making a sarcastic joke to a friend that made me genuinely laugh. These little moments became milestones. Proof that survival wasn't just endurance, it was growth. We tried talking more, carefully, cautiously. I asked him questions, honest, sometimes brutal questions about why, about Lena, about what he truly felt. He answered, painfully, and with a raw honesty I hadn't anticipated. He cried often. Sometimes I cried too. Sometimes silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. One night, I asked, "Do you regret it?" He nodded, tears streaking his face. "Every day. I hate myself. I hate what I did. I want to fix this, I don't know if I can." "Wanting to fix it doesn't erase the past," I said softly, my voice breaking. "It doesn't erase the nights I thought we were together, but you were with her in some way. It doesn't undo the betrayal." "I know," he whispered. And that's where we remained for weeks. In this liminal space, where love and pain coexisted uneasily. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to throw the house into chaos. I wanted to run. I also wanted to stay. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside the man who betrayed me, the one I loved for over a decade, there was still a soul capable of remorse and rebuilding. Daily life became a series of small, intentional acts. I walked Penny alone, feeling the crisp air in my lungs and remembering that independence existed even in a fractured life. I went to brunch with friends, laughing more freely than I thought I could. I attended art shows, wandered bookstores, reconnected with hobbies I had abandoned when life was routine. Each act was a quiet rebellion against the grief that threatened to consume me. And yet, even in moments of progress, grief struck without warning. A song would play on the radio, a scent would linger in the kitchen, or he'd look at me in a way that reminded me of the man he used to be. Panic and sorrow returned in waves, unpredictable and intense. I learned to brace myself, to ride the emotional tide without drowning. I began noticing subtle changes in him too. He was quieter, more attentive, less casual with affection. He made an effort not to cross boundaries, not to push for intimacy, not to assume forgiveness. Sometimes I wondered if it was guilt or genuine care, or a mix of both. But it didn't matter yet. What mattered was that we existed together in a fragile, tense truce, learning the difficult art of cohabitation after trust shattered. Then came the first night we actually talked like adults, without anger or tears. I asked him about memories, about how we met, about our first date, about the moments that had defined us. For the first time in months, he laughed genuinely. I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt since discovery. It wasn't happiness, not really. But it was the recognition that human relationships are complicated, messy, painful, sometimes capable of fleeting beauty even in the aftermath of devastation. I realized that healing doesn't happen linearly. It's jagged, unpredictable. Some days I felt almost normal. Others, I spiraled into despair. But the constant thread was me reclaiming myself, piece by piece. I wasn't just surviving the betrayal anymore. I was learning to exist in a world that included it, to navigate life with a mind sharpened by grief and a heart strengthened by endurance. I started volunteering, quietly at first. Helping others gave me perspective, a reminder that pain is universal, that life continues despite heartbreak. I started setting small goals, reading a new book, cooking a meal without anxiety, taking a solo weekend trip. Each accomplishment was proof that survival wasn't passive. It required action, courage, and the stubborn determination to keep moving. Through it all, I still thought about the playlist. I listened once, only once, letting the music wash over me. It hurt. Every lyric, every chord, every word felt like a reminder of what I had lost. But I survived. And in surviving, I began to reclaim a portion of my life that felt entirely my own. Reddit, if you've been betrayed, know this. Pain is absolute, but so is resilience. Trust may never fully return, but life continues. Love may fracture, but the pieces you save can still be beautiful in unexpected ways. And sometimes, surviving is more than enough. It wasn't until the first real therapy breakthrough that I felt a flicker of control return to my life. I'd been seeing Drive Marks for about a month by then, twice a week, and every session had been a mix of excruciating vulnerability and small, grinding revelations. She didn't judge me for checking his messages, for obsessing over the playlist, for thinking the unthinkable. She simply guided me to confront the chaos inside my own mind, to give it structure, to name it, to understand it. You're carrying the weight of his choices as if they were yours, she said one afternoon. You have to stop that. You didn't betray yourself. He did. I nodded, tears spilling over. It felt like the first crack in a wall that had held me hostage for weeks. But the crack was jagged, dangerous. When I left her office, I still felt the pull of grief, the compulsion to check his phone, the itch of suspicion that never fully disappeared. It was as if my trust had been scattered into 1,000 shards, each reflecting memories I wasn't sure I could survive reliving. Flashbacks started coming, unbidden. Not always the painful ones, though those were relentless, but the small, beautiful moments that now felt tinged with betrayal. I remembered the first time he held my hand in the park, the way he laughed when Penny stole my sandwich at lunch, the long summer evenings spent staring at the stars on the balcony. And then, the horror. Those moments felt like lies in retrospect. Did he already know he'd betray me when he smiled? Had some part of him been planning a world I wasn't invited into? My chest would tighten at the thought. I found myself keeping a diary, writing everything. Anger, sorrow, nostalgia, every tiny victory in emotional survival. Some nights, the ink on the page blurred from tears. Other nights, I wrote furiously, words tumbling out as if documenting my pain could somehow exorcise it. The act of writing became ritualistic, meditative, necessary. Each sentence a step back toward sanity. He tried to help. Sometimes he asked if I wanted to talk. Sometimes he didn't. His guilt made him quiet, careful, a different person than the man I had married. It was like living with a ghost. A man who looked like my husband but carried the shadow of betrayal in his eyes. I wanted to hate him. I did. I wanted to push him away, scream at him, never see him again. But I also wanted, selfishly, to reclaim the life we had built together. That pull was confusing and exhausting. One evening, we had a long talk that stretched for hours. I asked him why, what had gone wrong, why he'd looked for affection elsewhere when I thought we were happy. He answered honestly, painfully. I don't know why I did it, he admitted. I was restless, stupid, selfish. I thought I could have it both ways. I didn't mean to hurt you, not like this. I laughed bitterly, tears streaming. Not like this? You destroyed everything we built. Everything. I know, and I hate myself every day for it. We talked about Lena. Not in the lurid, gory detail I had feared, but enough to understand her role, the emotional intimacy he had misplaced, and the ways he had neglected me. I asked every question that came to mind, even the cruel ones. And he answered. All of it. With honesty, raw, stripped of excuses. The conversation didn't fix us. It didn't make the betrayal vanish. But it laid the groundwork for a possibility. The faintest glimmer that we might exist together without constant suspicion, if not trust yet. I also started noticing how I had changed. My moods, my perspective, my boundaries, they were all shifting. I no longer laughed blindly at his jokes. I no longer assumed his presence was benign. I questioned. I evaluated. I protected myself. And in doing so, I began to feel a small, powerful resurgence of self-respect. I began reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with people I had drifted from. I went to dinners, to small gatherings, to events that required me to interact with the world outside my home. It was exhausting, nerve-wracking, and terrifying, but I started to see the value in my own existence outside the sphere of betrayal. And yet, every night, the playlist haunted me. I would think of Lena, of what he felt, of what he did. I imagined her face when he texted her, the late-night whispers, the stolen moments. I hated her in a way I didn't want to admit, and I hated myself for hating her. But I couldn't stop. It was part of my processing. Months passed. Small victories accumulated. I started cooking again without shaking. I started taking walks and feeling peace instead of dread. I laughed more freely, even at moments I didn't expect. Penny, ever my companion, seemed to sense the change too. She stopped curling up anxiously when I cried and instead bounded with joy, dragging me into playful antics that reminded me life could still be simple and good. And him? He changed too, in subtle ways. Less casual with affection, more careful in conversation, aware that one wrong step could shatter the fragile truce we had established. Sometimes I wondered if it was genuine remorse or performative penance. I didn't care. I was learning to navigate life on my terms. One night, sitting on the balcony with Penny at my feet, I reflected on everything, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the survival. I realized that healing didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean forgiving. It didn't mean returning to who I was before. It meant acknowledging pain, embracing resilience, reclaiming autonomy. It meant existing, breathing, surviving. Reddit, if you're here because you've been betrayed, because your life has been turned upside down by someone you trusted, know this. You can survive. It's slow. It's painful. Some days you'll feel broken beyond repair. Some days, tiny victories will remind you that you're still alive. The most important relationship you have is with yourself. Nurture it. Protect it. Respect it. And eventually, you'll find that survival isn't just endurance, it's reclamation. Life had started to take on a rhythm that wasn't dictated solely by pain. I began to carve out spaces in my day that were just mine. I would wake before him, make coffee while the house was still quiet, watch the sunrise through the kitchen window. Penny would sit loyally at my feet, as if she, too, understood that these small moments were sacred. I kept my journal beside me, recording everything. Fleeting joys, recurring anxieties, the way I felt alive even when the past threatened to drag me under. He respected these moments. Or maybe he just knew better than to intrude. The boundaries I had built were firm. No casual touches. No assumptions of forgiveness. No silent gestures that implied everything was back to normal. It was excruciating for both of us, but necessary. I didn't want to exist in the shadow of betrayal any longer. At first, we barely spoke. Simple pleasantries. Muted conversations. Shared chores without conversation about our emotional landmines. I observed him, noting small changes. He lingered less over his phone, hesitated before casual gestures, sometimes watched me without saying anything, as if waiting for permission to exist in my space again. I started venturing out. Solo trips to the bookstore, long walks in the park, lunches with friends I hadn't seen in months. Each step was tiny, incremental, but meaningful. I was reclaiming life outside the betrayal. The act of existing independently became an assertion of power, a declaration that my world did not end with his choices. And yet, the playlist lingered in the back of my mind. It was a ghost, a constant reminder of the fracture in our lives. One evening, I opened it cautiously, letting a few songs play. I cried, yes, but not in despair. I cried in recognition, acknowledgement that my grief was valid, that betrayal was real, and that I could feel pain and still exist. I survived each note, each lyric, and felt a strange empowerment in that survival. We began talking more intentionally. Not about Lena, not about betrayal, at least not every time, but about mundane things. Bills, groceries, Penny's antics, plans for the weekend. We were testing boundaries, exploring what interaction without resentment could look like. Each conversation was careful, deliberate. Every misstep was met with immediate acknowledgement. We were learning, painfully, that trust wasn't a switch, it was a process, painstaking and fragile. Therapy continued to anchor me. Each session with Dr. Marks became more about rebuilding self-identity than dissecting betrayal. She encouraged me to set goals independent of my marriage, to rediscover hobbies, to explore interests that had been set aside. I joined a painting class, began running in the mornings, and started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, reinforced my agency, reminding me that I could thrive beyond grief. He watched these changes with what I interpreted as quiet admiration. Occasionally, he would comment, "I'm proud of you." I would stiffen, unsure whether to accept the compliment or reject it. My trust wasn't restored, it wasn't even close. But I began to accept that rebuilding didn't require him to be perfect. It required me to reclaim control of my own life. Flashbacks became more complex. I would remember our happier times not as pure nostalgia, but through the lens of survival. Our first apartment together, the nights we stayed up laughing until dawn, the way he held my hand in the rain. These memories were bittersweet, painful reminders of what was lost, yet also evidence of love that once existed. I learned to observe them without letting them dictate my present. There were days of regression, too. Unexpected triggers. A song on the radio, the sight of someone who resembled Lena, a casual phrase he muttered. Each episode brought tears, panic, or rage. But each episode also taught me resilience. I could feel, I could grieve, and I could emerge from it intact. Tentative reconciliation began to emerge in small gestures. One night, after a long conversation about boundaries and mutual expectations, he reached for my hand, carefully, slowly, giving me space to respond. I didn't pull away. Not fully. Not yet. But I didn't squeeze back. It was a negotiation of presence, of willingness to allow trust to rebuild, inch by inch. We also began discussing practicalities. Therapy for him, separately. Clearer communication about time and space. Plans for date nights that were structured, deliberate, to rebuild connection without forcing intimacy prematurely. We were walking on eggshells, but it was necessary. Healing after betrayal isn't spontaneous, it's intentional, structured, and emotionally exhausting. I began to reflect on myself more deeply. What had I learned? That my sense of self couldn't rely solely on another person. That boundaries are crucial. That grief is not linear. That survival is active. That love, even when broken, can be instructive, shaping resilience, strength, and wisdom. Reddit, if you've been betrayed, I want you to know this. Survival isn't passive. Rebuilding life after someone fractures your world is deliberate. Every small step matters. Every boundary set, every step taken alone, every journal entry, every tear, every laugh, it is proof that life continues. And sometimes, just sometimes, that continuation can be richer, fuller, and more meaningful than you ever imagined. Months turned into nearly a year, and the house began to feel different. Not fully healed, far from it, but different. The weight of betrayal hadn't lifted, but I had learned to carry it without collapsing. Each morning I woke with Penny curled at my feet. I reminded myself that survival didn't require perfection, just presence. He was there too. Sometimes quietly, sometimes lingering, sometimes distant. The dynamic between us was cautious, like two tightrope walkers above a chasm. One misstep could undo weeks of painstaking progress. And yet, there were moments of fragile connection. A shared joke about Penny's mischief, a small compliment, a tentative touch. Each was a negotiation of trust. Each was a reminder that love can exist in fragments, even when broken. Therapy had become routine, a lifeline I didn't fully recognize until I missed a session. Dr. Marks encouraged me to explore not just our marriage but my identity outside it. I began to journal not only my pain but my desires, my fears, my ambitions. I drafted plans for a solo trip, considered enrolling in a course I'd always postponed, started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in months. Each action reinforced that my life was mine, and it wasn't defined solely by betrayal. He started therapy too. I didn't know if it was guilt or genuine desire to repair, but he attended sessions and spoke openly with his therapist about his actions, about Lena, about our marriage. I was cautious, observation was key, but I recognized the value in accountability. Sometimes I would overhear him talking, and a small sense of relief would wash over me. He was trying. Not perfectly, not fully, but trying. Cohabitation became a delicate dance. I learned to assert boundaries without alienating him. He learned to navigate my space without overstepping. Shared chores, meal planning, even small daily routines became exercises in trust. There were arguments, of course, sharp words born from old wounds resurfacing, but there was also dialogue, reflection, and apology. The cycle of hurt and repair became slower, more measured, more intentional. I revisited memories more intentionally. Flashbacks of our early years became bittersweet rather than tormenting. I remembered how he held my hand when I was nervous about moving in together, how he comforted me during my mother's illness, how he made me laugh when I wanted to cry. These memories didn't erase the betrayal, but they provided context. Love existed before, and in some ways, it still could, albeit differently. I noticed subtle changes in myself. I laughed more freely, sometimes even at him. I began taking solo trips, short weekend getaways, reclaiming spaces where I didn't have to navigate the shadow of betrayal. I experimented with painting and running, hobbies that reminded me I had interests and talents beyond marriage. Each small achievement felt like a stitch in a patchwork quilt of resilience. The playlist still lingered in my mind. Once in a while, I would listen to it intentionally, letting the music wash over me. Painful, yes, but instructive. I no longer felt the compulsion to obsess over messages or check his phone. I could feel the hurt, acknowledge it, and let it pass. That was progress. Our conversations evolved. We could discuss our days, minor frustrations, and even touch on feelings, carefully. I asked about his relationship with Lena, his motivations, his regrets. His honesty was steady now, less defensive, more reflective. I still didn't fully trust him, but I recognized the value in transparency. He wasn't perfect, he never would be. But he was present in ways that mattered. I also began imagining life beyond him. Not necessarily ending our marriage, but acknowledging that my happiness wasn't tethered to him anymore. I could exist fully, independently, capable of love and joy regardless of whether our relationship survived. That perspective shifted everything. It made me stronger, more self-reliant, more grounded. Reddit, if you're here reading this because of betrayal, know this: healing is not linear. You will have good days and bad days. You will question yourself, your partner, your decisions. You will grieve, rage, and sometimes despair. But you will also find moments of clarity, strength, and resilience that surprise you. You can survive betrayal, rebuild boundaries, reclaim independence, and even redefine love on your terms. The man I married still exists in fragments. The man who betrayed me also exists in fragments. And so die, broken, yes, but rebuilding, reshaping, and learning that survival is not just endurance. Survival is reclamation. Survival is life lived fully, even when the past threatens to dictate the present. Every day is a negotiation. Every moment is a choice. And slowly, deliberately, I have learned that I am still me, resilient, alive, and capable of loving again, whether with him or without him. After more than a year of slow, painstaking rebuilding, life in our home had shifted in ways that felt almost normal. Almost, but not fully. I was stronger, more grounded. He was trying, still flawed but present. Our routines, once governed by fear and mistrust, now included small negotiations, meal planning together, shared walks with Penny, and, occasionally, quiet evenings on the balcony where words weren't necessary. Trust didn't return overnight. It was a slow, deliberate test, measured in small actions and careful observations. I would watch him, sometimes suspiciously, sometimes optimistically. He'd make choices that signaled accountability. Checking in when he ran late, answering my questions honestly, making space when I needed it. I responded with cautious acceptance, a tentative acknowledgement that life didn't have to be dictated by the past. We began experimenting with moments of intimacy again. Not full emotional or physical closeness, but touches, hugs, even brief handholds, gestures that symbolized a willingness to reconnect. I was careful, protecting the boundaries I had built for myself. And he respected them, showing, for the first time in months, a patience that didn't feel performative. Therapy continued, but I noticed I needed it less to unpack betrayal and more to navigate ongoing emotions, occasional jealousy, waves of grief, and the small pangs of mistrust that still bubbled up unexpectedly. I documented these feelings in my journal, processing without judgment. I realized that healing wasn't about erasing betrayal. It was about learning to live with its memory without letting it control me. Flashbacks to happier times were no longer torture. I could remember our first apartment, our late-night walks, our shared dreams without being crushed by the betrayal. These memories were bittersweet but instructive. They reminded me that love had existed, that it could exist again, and that my own resilience had been forged in the crucible of grief. Occasionally, I allowed myself to imagine the future. Not a perfect future, but one defined by awareness, mutual respect, and deliberate choice. We weren't fully healed, and perhaps never would be. But we were learning to exist together without letting the past dictate every action. And that, I realized, was a kind of progress. Sitting here now, Penny asleep at my feet, I realize how far I've come. Betrayal had shattered the life I thought I knew, leaving me raw, confused, and painfully aware of human fragility. But it also forced me to confront myself, to rebuild boundaries, to reclaim autonomy, and to redefine what love and trust meant for me. He remains in my life, cautiously, imperfectly, as do I. Our marriage is no longer defined by the naive certainty it once was, but by a deliberate, careful negotiation of trust and presence. I've learned to prioritize my own emotional well-being, to accept that pain doesn't disappear, and to recognize that survival is not passive. Survival is active. Survival is reclaiming life, piece by piece, breath by breath. I've forgiven myself for obsessing, for checking messages, for feeling every twist of grief. I've learned to accept that betrayal, while devastating, doesn't define the entirety of a person or a relationship. And while I may never forget the playlist, the messages, or the months of emotional infidelity, I have learned that life continues beyond pain. To anyone reading this who has been betrayed, know this: you can survive, you can heal, you can rebuild boundaries, reclaim independence, and redefine love on your own terms. Trust may never be complete. Forgiveness may never be full. But life, even scarred, continues, and sometimes that continuation is enough. I am still me. Stronger, wiser, and painfully aware of both human frailty and resilience. And that, read it, is enough. Found out my husband was cheating. Months of betrayal, grief, therapy, and self-discovery followed. We didn't return to the naive love we had before, but we learned to coexist, rebuild boundaries, and survive. Healing is messy, slow, and ongoing, but possible.